The ancient stone walls of Blackmire Keep had witnessed centuries of suffering, but none quite like that of its current prisoner, in the deepest dungeon, far below, where even the guards ventured. Elian sat with her back against the cold wall, silver chains binding her wrists and ankles. These weren't ordinary restraints. They were infused with runic magic, specifically designed to suppress her Omega nature. The metal gleamed faintly in the dim light that filtered through the small barred window near the ceiling, a cruel reminder of her captivity. 6 months had passed since Lord Darius had discovered her true identity and locked her away. As the last known Omega in the Northern Territories, she was both precious and dangerous, a bargaining chip in his political games, and a threat to the established order. The world had changed in the past century. Omegas had become increasingly rare, hunted for their abilities or forced into bonding with powerful alpha. Elian had managed to hide her nature for 23 years, disguising her scent with herbs and living quietly as a healer in a remote village, until Darius's men had come. She shifted, wincing as the chains clinked against the stone floor. The dampness of the cell had seeped into her bones, making her joints ache. Her once vibrant copper hair hung limp and dull around her face, and her green eyes had lost their spark. But deep within, a flame of defiance still burned. She would not break, would not submit to Darius's demands that she bond with him to strengthen. His political position, the sound of water dripping from the ceiling, echoed in the silence, marking time in an endless rhythm that had become both torment and comfort. Elian had learned to measure her days by the changing of the guards, the meager meals pushed through the small slot in her door, and the shifting quality of light from her window. Today, something felt different. The air seemed charged, expectant, as if the very stones of her prison were holding their breath. Elian lifted her head at the sound of footsteps echoing down the corridor. Not the usual heavy tread of the guards who brought her meager meals, but something lighter, cautious. She tensed, drawing herself up despite the weakness in her limbs. Had Darius finally tired of waiting for her to break? Was this some new tactic to force her compliance? The footsteps stopped outside her cell. A moment of silence followed, then a soft curse as someone fumbled with the lock. Elian's heart raced. In 6 months, no one had entered her cell except the guards and, occasionally, Darius himself. "Who's there?" Elian called, her voice hoarse from disuse. The lock clicked, and the door swung open to reveal a tall figure silhouetted against the dim torchlight of the corridor. As he stepped into the cell, Elian caught her breath. Even in the darkness, there was no mistaking what he was: an alpha, and a powerful one at that. His presence filled the small space, making the air feel suddenly thick and charged. Instinctively, she pressed herself back against the wall, chains rattling with her movement. "My name is Kieran," he said, his deep voice surprisingly gentle. "I've come to free you." Elian laughed bitterly, the sound scraping her throat. "And why would an alpha want to free me?" "Come to claim the prize Lord Darius has been keeping for himself." Kieran knelt before her, and in the faint light, she could see his face clearly for the first time. Strong features, framed by dark hair that fell just past his shoulders. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, amber, with flecks of gold, and filled with a pain that seemed ancient. He wore simple, dark clothing that allowed him to blend into shadows, and a sword hung at his hip, its hilt worn from use. "I need your help," he said simply, "and in return, I offer you freedom, my help." Elian's chains rattled as she shifted, suspicion evident in her narrowed eyes. "What could I possibly do for you?" Kieran's gaze dropped to the floor. "I bear a curse, one that has followed my bloodline for generations." The seers spoke of an Omega in chains, who would be the key to breaking it. "And you believe that's me?" Elian couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "Some prophesied savior for your family troubles." "I don't know," he admitted, meeting her eyes again. "But you're the first Omega I've found in 20 years of searching." Something in his honesty made Elian pause. She studied him more carefully. Despite his obvious strength, there was a weariness to him, a burden that seemed to weigh on his shoulders. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and lines of strain marked his forehead. This was not a man who had come to gloat or to claim. "What is this curse?" she asked, curiosity overcoming caution. Kieran hesitated, then rolled up his sleeve. In the dim light, Ilian could see dark markings spreading up his arm like veins of black ink, pulsing slightly, as if alive. "It begins like this. The shadow blight, they call it. It will eventually consume me, as it did my father and his father before him. Every alpha in my line dies before their 35th year." "And how old are you?" Ilian asked quietly, unable to tear her eyes from the sinister markings. 34, he replied. "I have less than a year." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Ilian had heard tales of the Shadow Blighter mythical curse that turned alphas into mindless beasts before killing them. She had thought it just a story to frighten children, a cautionary tale about the dangers of alpha rage unchecked. "Even if I wanted to help you," she said finally, "I can't. These chains." She lifted her wrists, the silver links, catching the light. "They suppress my abilities. I'm no more useful to you than any ordinary human." Kieran reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ornate key. Its handle was shaped like a wolf's head, with tiny sapphires for eyes. "That's why I brought this." It was not easy to obtain. Elian's eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" "Lord Darius keeps many secrets, but his vault is not as impenetrable as he believes." A ghost of a smile crossed Kieran's face. "Will you come with me? I cannot promise safety, but I swear on my honor that you will be free, regardless of whether you can help me or not." Elian hesitated, searching his face for any sign of deception. Freedom was all she had dreamed of for months, but freedom with an alpha she didn't know. An alpha who might be turning into a monster. Yet something in his eyes, the sincerity, the desperation moved her. And what choice did she really have? Stay and rot in Darius's dungeon, or take a chance on this stranger? "How did you find me?" she asked, needing to understand before she committed. "I've been tracking rumors of Omegas for years," Kieran explained, settling more comfortably on the floor across from her. "When I heard whispers of Lord Darius capturing one, I knew I had to investigate. I've been watching the keep for weeks, learning the guards' patterns, searching for a way in, and if I don't believe in your prophecy, then I still free you," Kieran said firmly. "I'll take you wherever you wish to go, provide you with supplies, and leave you in peace. I am not Darius. I do not force others to serve my needs." His words rang with truth, and Elian felt something she hadn't experienced in months' hope. She looked down at the chains that had bound her for so long, then back at the key in Kieran's hand. "Unlock these chains," she said finally, "and I will go with you." Relief washed over Kieran's face as he inserted the key into the lock on her wrist cuffs. The mechanism clicked, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hiss, the runes etched into the silver began to fade. The moment the first chain fell away, Elian felt a surge of energy flow through her. For Omega senses dulled for so long began to awaken, and with them came an unexpected awareness of Kieran, not just as an alpha, but as something more, something that called to her on a level she couldn't explain. His scent filled her nostrils, pine and smoke and something uniquely his own. For inner Omega, suppressed for months, stirred in recognition. As the last chain fell away, their eyes met. And Elian knew with sudden certainty that her fate was now irrevocably linked with his. The prophecy. He spoke of her haps. There was truth to it, after all. "We need to move quickly," Kieran said, helping her to her feet. Her legs trembled, weak from disuse, and he supported her with a gentle hand at her elbow. "Darius's men will discover my intrusion soon." "How do we get out?" Elian asked, taking her first tentative steps. "The keep is heavily guarded." "The same way I came in," Kieran replied, leading her to the door. "There's an old passage beneath the east wall, forgotten by all but the rats and me. But first, we need to move through the dungeons without being seen." As they slipped into the corridor, Elian cast one last glance at the cell that had been her prison. Then, with determination strengthening her steps. She followed Kieran toward freedom and toward whatever destiny awaited them. Both HREE days of hard riding had brought them to the ancient forest of Elderwood. Elian sat before the campfire, watching the flames dance as Kieran returned from hunting with 2 rabbits for their dinner. In the short time they'd been traveling together, she'd observed the progression of his curse. The black veins had crept higher up his arm, now reaching his shoulder, and occasionally pain would flash across his face, though he tried to hide it. The forest around them was alive with night sounds, the hooting of owls, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through ancient trees. Elderwood was said to be one of the last places where the old magic still lingered, untouched by the modern world's disbelief. Elian could feel it in the air, a subtle vibration that resonated with her awakening Omega senses. The temple should be just beyond the northern ridge, Kieran said, as he set about preparing their meal, skillfully skinning the rabbits with practiced movements. We'll reach it by midday tomorrow. And you're certain this temple holds the answer? Elian asked, pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders against the evening chill. The nights were growing colder as autumn deepened, the leaves around them turning to gold and crimson. Kieran's hands stilled. The prophecy speaks of 3 elements needed to break the curse: the Omega in chains, the temple of the old gods, and he hesitated, his eyes fixed on his task, and Elian prompted, leaning forward slightly. A bond freely given, he finished quietly, not meeting her eyes. Elian felt heat rise to her cheeks. A bond, the sacred connection between an Alpha and Omega, was not something taken lightly. It was permanent, souled deep, binding 2 people together in ways that transcended the physical. In the old days, such bonds had been celebrated, seen as the highest form of connection. Now, they were rare, often forced rather than chosen. You didn't mention that part before, she said carefully, studying his profile in the firelight. Because I would never ask it of you, Kieran replied firmly, finally looking up at her. The amber of his eyes reflected the flames, giving them an otherworldly glow. The prophecy is unclear. Perhaps there's another interpretation, another way. Elian studied him in the firelight. Despite his alpha status, Kieran had been nothing but respectful since freeing her. He'd given her space, never used his dominance to influence her, and had shared his supplies generously. When they'd stopped at a village market the day before, he'd insisted on buying her new clothes to replace her prison rags, turning his back while she changed behind a screen of trees. More than that, she'd begun to sense something in him, a nobility of spirit that transcended designation. Tell me about the curse, she said, accepting a portion of the rabbit he'd spitted over the fire. How did it begin? Kieran sighed, settling back against a tree trunk. The firelight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the weariness there. The story passed down through my family tells of an ancestor, Alaric, who betrayed an Omega he had promised a bond with. Instead, he chose power, aligning himself with a rival pack for political advantage. The Omega he betrayed was a powerful seer who, in her grief and rage, called upon the old gods to curse his bloodline. What was her name? Elian asked, taking a bite of the tender meat. Lyra, Kieran replied softly. Her name was Lyra. It said that she loved him deeply, that their match was true. But Alaric's ambition outweighed his heart. And now every alpha in your line bears this curse. Kieran nodded, absently rubbing his arm where the black veins pulsed beneath his sleeve. It manifests when we turn 30, growing worse until, he trailed off, his gaze distant. Until you become the beast, Elian finished softly. Yes, my father locked himself away when the time came. I still remember his screams. Kieran's voice was hollow with the memory. I was only 10. My mother tried to comfort him until the end, but he made her promise to stay behind the locked door, no matter what he said or how he begged. The transformation took 3 days. I'm sorry, Elian said, the simple words inadequate for the depth of his loss. After that, my mother dedicated herself to finding a cure. She consulted seers, scholars, anyone who might have knowledge of the old ways. It was she who first discovered the prophecy, though she died before she could fully decipher it. Elian moved closer, drawn by his pain, and there's never been any way to break it. Many have tried. Some sought to appease the old gods with offerings. Others attempted to use dark magic. My grandfather even tried to end his line by taking his own life before the transformation. But the curse prevented it. The blade turned in his hand at the last moment. Kieran's amber eyes reflected the firelight. I am the last of my bloodline. If I fail, then we won't fail, Elian said, with sudden determination. She reached out, hesitating only briefly before placing her hand over his. The contact sent a jolt through them both, a recognition that went beyond the physical. For Omega nature responded to his Alpha. But it was more than that, a connection that felt predestined, as if their souls recognized each other from some ancient memory. Kieran looked at their joined hands, then up at her face, surprise and something like hope in his expression. You would consider it the bond? I don't know, Elian admitted honestly. A bond is not something to enter into lightly. But I do know that I want to help you break this curse. You freed me when you had no obligation to do so. You've treated me with respect when most alphas would have seen me as property. I owe you a debt. You owe me nothing, Kieran said firmly. Your freedom was your right, not my gift. That night, as Elian lay awake beneath the stars, she contemplated what lay ahead. A bond freely given. Could she give herself to this Alpha she barely knew, bound by a prophecy and a curse? Yet each hour in Kieran's presence made the idea less frightening. There was something between them, something that felt like destiny. She turned her head to look at him, sleeping a respectful distance away. In slumber, the lines of worry smoothed from his face, making him appear younger. The curse marks were visible at the collar of his shirt, a stark reminder of what was at stake. Elian found herself wondering what it would be like to be bonded to him, to share his thoughts, his feelings, to be connected in the most intimate way possible. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a strange warmth. The next day dawned clear and cold. They broke camp early, riding north toward the ridge Kieran had mentioned. As they climbed higher, the forest changed. The trees growing taller and more ancient, their trunks wider than 3 men standing with arms outstretched. Moss hung from branches like green beards, and the undergrowth thinned, revealing a carpet of fallen leaves that muffled their horses' hoofbeats. We're close, Kieran said, as they crested the ridge. Can you feel it? Elian nodded. The air here felt differentiated, with an energy that made her skin tingle. Her Omega senses, growing stronger each day since her chains were removed, detected the ancient magic that permeated this place. It called to something deep within her, awakening abilities she hadn't known she possessed. They dismounted, leading their horses down a narrow path that wound between massive trees. Spring had come to the valley, painting the meadows with wildflowers and filling the air with the scent of new beginnings. Elian stood on the balcony of their home, watching as Kieran trained with the younger members of their pack in the field below. 6 months had passed since the breaking of the curse, and in that time they had built something. Neither had dared to dream of a community where alphas, betas, and the few omegas they had managed to find and free could live together in harmony. The mountain estate that had once belonged to Kieran's family had been abandoned for decades, left to crumble after his father's death. Now, it teemed with life again. The main house had been restored, its stone walls gleaming in the morning sunlight. Smaller cottages dotted the surrounding meadows, housing the 23 people who had joined their unusual pack. Gardens flourished, where once there had been only weeds, and the sound of children's laughter echoed. Where silence had reigned for too long, their bond had only strengthened with time, deepening into something that transcended the physical connection between Alpha and Omega. Through it, they had discovered abilities, long thought lost to their kind, the capacity to share strength, to heal, to sense each other's emotions across great distances. The ancient texts in the temple had spoken of such bonds, but few in the modern world believed them to be more than myths. Elian closed her eyes, feeling the gentle pulse of Kieran's presence through their bond. Even now, the sensation filled her with wonder. She could sense his concentration as he demonstrated a defensive move to a young alpha girl, his patience as he corrected her stance, his quiet pride in her progress. These emotions flowed through their connection like water in a stream, natural and unimpeded. Kieran looked up, sensing her attention, and smiled. Even from this distance, Elian could feel the warmth of his love through their bond. He excused himself from the training session and made his way toward the house, his long strides eating up the distance between them. Minutes later, his arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What has you so contemplative today?" he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Elian leaned back against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I was thinking about how much has changed. A year ago, I was in chains, believing I would die in that dungeon. And now," Kieran prompted, turning her gently to face him. The curse marks that had once marred his skin were gone, leaving only the faintest silver tracery like old scars to remind them of what they had overcome. "Now, I understand why the prophecy chose us," she said, reaching up to trace the place where the black veins had once pulsed with dark magic. "It wasn't just about breaking your family's curse. It was about what would come after." Since establishing their sanctuary, word had spread through whispered conversations and coded messages. Other Omegas, hidden away or living in disguise, had begun to seek them out. Some came alone, having escaped captivity or fled arranged bonds. Others were brought by sympathetic betas or alphas who believed in a different way. With each new arrival, the balance of their world shifted a little more toward what it had once been before. Fear and prejudice had driven Omegas to near extinction. "We received another message today," Kieran said, taking her hand and leading her to the stone bench that overlooked the valley. The bench had become their favorite place for private conversations, away from the busy life of the pack. An Omega child, hidden by her family in the Western Isles. "They've heard of us and want to bring her here." "How old?" Elian asked, concern immediately evident in her voice. Omega children were particularly vulnerable, their emerging abilities making them targets before they learned to control them. 7, Kieran replied, his expression grave. "She's begun showing signs earlier than most. Her family has been hiding her, but they fear they cannot keep her safe much longer." "Then we'll welcome her," Elian said, without hesitation, "as we have all the others." Their work was not without challenges. Lord Darius, and others like him, viewed their growing community as a threat to the established order. There had been attempts to infiltrate their sanctuary, to recapture the Omegas they had freed. But the bond between Elian and Kieran had created a protective magic that extended to all who sought refuge with them. A barrier, invisible but impenetrable, surrounded their valley, allowing entry only to those who came with peaceful intentions. "I've asked Mira and Tomas to meet the family at the border crossing," Kieran said, referring to two of their most trusted pack members, a mated beta pair who had been among the first to join them. "They'll guide them safely here." Elian nodded her approval. Mira and Tomas were skilled scouts, able to travel undetected through even the most heavily patrolled territories. They had helped bring in 5 Omegas already, navigating the dangerous routes with a caution born of experience. "There's something else," Kieran said, a hint of nervousness in his voice that immediately caught Elian's attention. Through their bond, she felt a complex mixture of emotions, joy, wonder, and a touch of fear. "What is it?" she asked, turning to face him fully. "The healers confirmed it this morning," he said, his amber eyes searching hers. "What we suspected." Elian's eyes widened as she felt his emotions through their bond, the full force of his joy washing over her like a wave. "You mean," Kieran nodded, placing a gentle hand on her abdomen. "The first child, born of a true Alpha-Omega bond in generations." Tears filled Elian's eyes as the reality of it washed over her. She had suspected for weeks, her body changing in subtle ways, her connection to the natural world growing even stronger. But to have it confirmed, to know that within her grew a new life, their child was overwhelming. "Our child will be born free of curses, free of chains," Kieran said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "a symbol of the new world we're building. The old prophecies speak of such a child," he continued, drawing her close. "One who would bridge the divide between all designations, who would carry the magic of both Alpha and Omega." Elian placed her hand over his. "Then we'll raise them to use that magic wisely, to continue what we've started here." Through their bond, she shared her own complex emotions, her joy, her hopes, her fears for the future. Kieran received them all, his love enveloping her like a protective shield. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly, voicing a question that had lingered in the back of her mind. "Bonding with me because of a prophecy." Kieran's surprise rippled through their connection. "Regret, Elian. The prophecy may have brought us together, but the bond was my choice as much as yours. I would choose you again, 1,000 times over, prophecy or no prophecy." His sincerity flowed through their bond, leaving no room for doubt. Elian smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Was what I." The afternoon sun bathed the valley in golden light as they sat together, planning for the future, both the immediate challenges of bringing the Omega child safely to their sanctuary and the vision of the world they hoped to create for their own child. "We should tell the others tonight," Elian said, thinking of their pack members, who had become family. "At the evening meal," Kieran agreed, his happiness radiating through their bond. "They'll be overjoyed, especially Nessa." The elderly Omega, who had joined them 3 months ago, had become something of a grandmother figure to the younger pack members, sharing her knowledge of the old ways that had nearly been lost. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, they made their way back to the main house. The great hall had been restored to its former glory, with long wooden tables where the pack gathered each evening to share meals and stories. Tonight, the air was filled with the scent of fresh bread and roasting meat, the work of the day giving way to the comfort of community. Elian and Kieran entered hand in hand, their bond humming with shared anticipation. Conversations paused momentarily as pack members sensed the importance of the moment, their instincts attuned to the subtle shifts in their leader's emotions. Nessa was the first to understand, her wise eyes widening as she looked at Elian. The old Omega rose from her seat, crossing the room with surprising speed for one of her years. "It's true, then?" she asked, her weathered hands reaching for Elian's. Elian nodded, unable to contain her smile. "Yes." A murmur ran through the gathered pack members, quickly building to exclamations of joy and congratulations. In a world where Alpha-Mega bonds had become rare, and children from such unions even rarer, this news represented more than just a personal happiness, was hoped for their collective future. Kieran raised his cup, calling for attention. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the new life that will join our pack, but all that we have built together. 6 months ago, many of us were strangers, bound only by a shared vision of a different world. Now, we are family." Cheers erupted around the hall, cups raised in toast. Elian looked around at the faces of their Pakelphas betas and Omegas united not by traditional hierarchy, but by choice and respect. Each had their own story, their own journey that had led them here. Some, like Elian, had escaped captivity. Others had left positions of privilege, unable to reconcile themselves to the injustices of the current system. All had found a home in this valley. Later that night, as they lay in their chamber, Kieran's hand rested protectively over Elian's still flat abdomen. Through their bond, she could feel his thoughts not as words, but as impressions, emotions, hopes for their child's future. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly, though she could sense the general shape of his thoughts. "I'm thinking about my father," Kieran replied, his voice quiet in the darkness. "About how he never got to see this. The curse broken, our family continuing. I wish he could have known that his line wouldn't end in darkness." Elian turned to face him, her hand cupping his cheek. "He knows," she said with certainty. "Wherever he is, he knows." Through their bond, she sent him comfort, wrapping his grief in her love. This was the true power of their connection. Just the practical abilities it granted them, but the emotional support that flowed between them, strengthening them, both as the moon rose over the valley, casting silver light through their window. They spoke of their hopes for their child, for their pack, for the world they were trying to build. The challenges ahead were many. Lord Darius and his allies would not easily accept the changes they represented, and the journey toward a more balanced society would be long and difficult. But as Elian drifted toward sleep, Kieran's arms around her, and their bond pulsing with shared purpose and love, she knew that the greatest magic of all was not in breaking curses, but in building something new from their shattered remains. The chains that had once bound them, both literal and metaphorical, had become the foundations of their strength. And in that strength, they had found not just freedom, but home. As spring deepened into summer, their valley flourished. The Omega child from the Western Isles arrived safely, quickly finding her place among the other children in the pack. Elian's pregnancy progressed, her connection to the natural world growing stronger with each passing day. Through their bond, Kieran shared in the experience, feeling the first fluttering movements of their child, as if they were his own, and beyond their protected valley. Whispers spread of a new way of alphas, betas, and omegas living in harmony, of bonds formed by choice rather than coercion, of ancient magic reawakening in the world. Some dismissed these stories as mere fantasy, but others listened, hope kindling in hearts long resigned to the way things were. The Omega found in chains and the Alpha, cursed by history, had defied destiny by embracing it, transforming a prophecy of obligation into one of love. And in doing so, they had begun to rewrite the story of their world. One freed Omega, one chosen bond, one day at a time.